Okay, shall we start then, Mark? Welcome, everybody. All the visitors that are joining us tonight. You can find more about the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh on our website, Facebook, Twitter, and we even have our own YouTube channel now, so you can catch up on any of the talks you may have missed. But tonight, we have a talk by Bruce Vickery. Before I come on to that, I'll just run through some of the highlights just going forward. On Wednesday next, we have the Landmark Panorama, one of the early images, sketches of the Milky Way, which Clive will be talking about, followed by Horst, who will be giving us a talk about the sky in July. On the 3rd of July, we've got the BioRock experiment with Dr. Rosa Santamartino from Edinburgh, and then the imaging group for members only on the 8th. And Ian Smith will be giving us a scope talk that night as well. Professor Andy Lawrence will be talking of things that go bang in the night on Friday the 10th. And on the 15th, Glutton for Punishment, I think Mark is going to talk to us about astro imaging at part 5, and that'll be imaging for science projects. And on the 17th, we've got Professor David Waltham talking about Is Earth Special? And I have one more addition. I'm able to confirm in the last few minutes that on the 22nd, Wednesday, the 22nd of July, the Principal Scientific Officer for the Parker Space Probe, NASA's Parker Space Probe, based in Maryland, Dr. Noir Roufi from Tunisia, will be joining us live from Maryland to talk to us about the Parker Solar Probe. So that is going to be quite a unique event for us, I think. So, having said that, I'm going to hand you over to Bruce.
Can I just say that the imaging group next week is for all ASC members, not just imaging group members, so you can all come along.
Sorry,
to that.
yes. Okay, Bruce, you want to share your slides?
Right. Can you see it? Can everybody see this? I've got my slides up now, I think.
You shared your screen yet?
Oh, did I share it correctly?
It's not sharing yet.
Oh, okay. Let me just escape from that then. I did click the share button. But what happened next? Share screen, right? Oh, I didn't click share on the second box.
That's looking good. Yeah.
We got it now. Oh, now I've got to go back into F5.
Just from the beginning. Left.
There we go. There we go. I got an F5 there. Right. Thanks, Andrew, for your introduction. And good evening, everyone who's joining this talk. This is a little cameo that I discovered when I was studying James Bradley. And I hope it's instructive, I hope, but I hope also somewhat enjoyable. And for those who didn't go, well, we're going to meet James Bradley. He's the man on the left there, quite a lot in this talk. And we're going to have a little bumping into Edmund Halley and to the ubiquitous Newton as we go along. Now, for those of you who didn't see my speed of light talk last month, just a few words about that. This is a photograph taken at Greenwich, and you can see this telescope. It's not a pipe, it's a telescope. And this must be just about the most important telescope ever that was built in the world. And it's certainly we're lucky that it survived, because this telescope, which was owned by James Bradley, discovered two of the most important celestial dynamics effects of all time. And James Bradley became rich and famous twice in his lifetime. And I passed the question at the end of that forever. And he must be on the short list. He was the third Astronomer Royal and discoverer of the aberration of light. And he measured the speed of light 300 years ago nearly to within 1.5% of what we know it today. And he didn't know what he was measuring at the time. And he also measured the nutation of the Earth's axis, which is a little wobble that the Earth's axis has over a period of time, caused by the gravitation of the moon mainly. So that's the man that we're talking about. Let me start with his grave, which I did show last time as well. There's a fairly humble inscription here on the end of it. This is in Gloucestershire, incidentally. To the memory of the Reverend James Bradley, D.D., 1693 to 1762, Astronomer Royal, 1742 to 1762. Now there's 3 dates on the end of that: birth, when he became Astronomer Royal, and when he died. And what's of interest is only one of those dates is correct. One of them is wrong, and the other one, we could have a debate about whether it's right or wrong. So how's that? 3 dates, 3 completely different characteristics in those dates. So you can see why I've called this, I was going to call it fake news actually, but you can see why I've called it uncovering the facts. You can find a lot of information about James Bradley on the web, incidentally. I did most of the first talk and quite a bit of this talk just from web information. So let me ask a question about James Bradley up front here. If you go onto the web and you type his name in and you put the word astronomer after it, by the way, otherwise you'll get millions of James Bradleys, almost every site on the web dealing with Bradley quotes his birth as being in March 1693. And 2 sites give an exact day, actually. So that's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, except for about 1 or 2 sites, but you'll mostly get this one. The 2 sites that give an exact day, one of them is the 3rd of March, the other one's the 23rd, and arbitrarily I've picked the 23rd, but I could have picked the 3rd, it makes no difference. So I'm going to, just to give you a little image here, back in those days, mostly babies were born at home. So imagine the scene that Bradley's mother is in a bedroom giving birth to Bradley, and in the kitchen, there's a calendar hanging on the wall, and that calendar is saying the 23rd of March, 1693. Now that's important. That's the scene, right? His death is quoted almost everywhere. I've only seen one place different from the 13th of July, and I think they worked it out incorrectly. So his date of death, again, let's imagine him. He went back to Gloucestershire to die. Actually, his health was failing towards the end of time when he was at Greenwich. He went back to Gloucestershire, and he stayed with his in-laws, in fact, when he went back. And imagine him passing away in a bed in the house, and there's a calendar on the wall in the kitchen, and that calendar says the 13th of July, 1762. Okay, simple question: how old was James Bradley when he died? Okay, that's question 1. No need to call it out to your telly. Here's an unrelated question: have you ever wondered why the tax year starts on the 6th of April? Where on earth did that date come from? You know, did they just throw a dart at a calendar or something? So we're going to answer this question tonight as well. Let's just go back to Bradley now. Question 1. How do we find out the age at death of a person? Well, we subtract the year of birth from the year of death. For Bradley, we are subtracting 1693 from 1762, and we get 69. We then look to see if he's had his birthday, because if he hasn't had his birthday, he'd only be 68. If he had his birthday, he'd be 69. Well, he was born in March, and he died in July, so he's had his birthday. So he was 69, right? It's the wrong answer. Given those dates and the images that I promoted, that is the wrong answer, 69. Now, it all hinges on the date of Easter. In 325 AD, there was a Christian meeting in Nicaea, and this was a large collection of Christian groups, and they wanted to define what Christianity was so that everyone went out with a consistent story. And of course, they needed to define some dates as well. And one of the things they defined was the date of Easter Sunday, which is the date of the resurrection. And they chose the following. Easter Sunday is the first Sunday after the first full moon on or after the vernal equinox. So we start with the vernal equinox. And this is the rule that's still used today. After all those years, that's the rule for Easter Sunday. Now, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII was looking to put his Easter service on. So he wanted to find out what the date of Easter Sunday was. And he's using the Julian calendar, which had been around since 45 BC. And he was calculating the date of Easter, but he had a problem with the vernal equinox. In 325 AD, the vernal equinox was on the 20th of March, but in 1582 AD, it was on the 10th of March. And he wouldn't have just used both those two dates alone. He'd have noticed over the years that Easter had started on the 20th of March and it had been gradually working backwards through the calendar. It was never going forwards. And so part of what he's saying to himself is, if this keeps happening, it'll eventually hit Christmas, and that can't be right. So he wants to fix the calendar. And he does two things to fix the calendar. Firstly, he realigns the vernal equinox to the 20th of March. And he does that by knocking 10 days out of the calendar in 1582. So the 5th of October to the 14th of October do not exist in the Gregorian calendar. So if you see a document from the continent, for example, that says an event happened on the 10th of October, 1582, you know immediately it's fake news. That date never existed. They went from the 4th to the 15th in a one-up. But he also revised the rules for leap years, because if he doesn't change the rules for leap years, it's going to start going backwards again. And that's why we've got the rule for centuries, that it's got to be divisible by 400 to be a leap year. And you can actually try this out actually between 325 AD and 1582 AD. And if you apply that rule to that period, you do get 10 days. So it's all been very consistent. And right up until today, things are going pretty well. Now, several continental countries jumped at this. The obvious ones being Italy, of course, Spain, Germany, France, all of our friends, right? But over here, it was a case of not so fast, not so fast. We're Protestants over here. This is a thinly veiled Roman Catholic plot to control us. We're not doing it, okay? So we soldiered on, and now our calendar is out of kilter with the continent. But it wasn't a thinly veiled plot. It was just a brilliant piece of astronomy. He'd worked out that the orbit of the Earth's period was actually a little bit less than 365¼ days, which it is in the Julian calendar. And so we were forced eventually to admit that we got this wrong. It's scientific, it's not religious. And Westminster passed a Calendar Act in 1751. And they introduced two changes in that calendar. They introduced two changes to the calendar of 1752. First thing they did was they knocked 11 days out of September that year, the 3rd to the 13th. So again, if somebody tells you something happened in this country on the 10th of September, 1752, you know it's fake news. Why did we remove 11 days? Well, since 1582, there's been 1600, and that's a leap year in both calendars because it's divisible by 400. We've also had 1700. That's only a leap year in the Julian calendar and not in the Gregorian. So we were an extra day out of kilter. So we had to knock 11 days out of the calendar, okay? But Westminster also did something else with the calendar. They changed the date of the first day of the year. Now, there's a surprise. How many people out there know that it wasn't the 1st of January for many, many, many years until 1752? That was the first year that it was on the 1st of January. Prior to that, it was on a day called Lady Day. Lady Day is the 25th of March, which is exactly 9 months before Christmas. And in some parts of the Christian church, this is a very sacred day. And it's the day on which the angel Gabriel told Mary that there was going to be a virgin birth. So what better day to be the first day of the year? And that's what it normally was, right up until 1752. So if we look at 1693 here, where Bradley was born, purported to be born, the day after Bradley was born, 24th of the 3rd, right, was followed by the 25th of 1694. So it's pretty obvious what's happening here. On the 23rd of the 3rd, 1693, he's born. On the 24th of the 3rd, 1693, he's 1 day old. But the next day, is the 25th of the 3rd, 1694. And he's only 2 days old. So you can get your double whiskies out now and your stiff gins. We think he's one because he was born, if we were just given the 2 dates, we'd say he was born on 23rd, he's had his birthday, so he's one, but he's only 2 days old. Now this carries on throughout his whole life. He's always 1 year behind what we think he is, making him only 68 years old at the time of his death. Okay? Don't believe this yet, because I'm now going to check as I go through this talk whether his date of birth and his date of death are right. So we're going to have to look at Bradley in a bit more detail as I go through this. Lady Day was also the start of the tax year. That's an obvious choice, isn't it? First day of the year. But when we lost 11 days, I beg your pardon, in 1752, the 24th of March, past that 11 days loss, is only a 254-day year. And obviously, everybody in the country was pretty agitated about that. And there was a lot of problems with the government, shall we say, and Westminster decided, yeah, we're not going to bill you for all your tax for a 254-day year. We'll move the date that you have to pay your tax to the 4th of April, 11 days. And that means the tax year now starts on the 5th of April. That's not the 6th, the 5th. So everybody's happy. They've got away with it. And in the year 1800, there was a further day put into it, because believe it or not, some people were still old enough to remember 1752. And they went to the government and said, come on, if you hadn't changed the calendar, we'd have had a 366 day this year, not a 365 one. So we want that day as well. The government relented, and we got the date of the tax year started on the 6th of April, where it's been ever since. We could have changed it in 1900, but I don't think anybody was alive that could remember 1752. So you have to take a lot of care when you're looking at historical documents, particularly when you get past 1752. And what put me on the trail of this talk was one of Bradley's documents, which is how I leaked into this little cameo, because I do family history as well. And I spotted this document and I thought, this is interesting. Now, last month, when I told you about Nutation, I said that it was announced in 1748 by Bradley. Now, the way Bradley announced Nutation was by way of a letter, actually. He had a friend called the Earl of Macclesfield, George. I don't know what the guy's surname was. Earl of Macclesfield. And this friend of his was a parliamentarian, and he was an amateur astronomer. So they'd known each other for quite some time. Bradley helped him with his astronomy, and Macclesfield was one of the people, I think, who went to the government and said, give Bradley the Astronomer Royal position when Halley died, without putting it out to have people applying for it, because he was the best astronomer in the world at the time. So it's a letter to this here. Let's go down to the bottom first, where he signs off. My lord, your lordship's most obedient humble servant. Wonderful words we don't use today. James Bradley. And it's dated Greenwich, December the 31st, 1747. Now there's an interesting date. We might think he was clearing his desk for the new year, but he wasn't. Up here at the beginning of the letter, there's a little note in the margin here. This is a scanned image from an old document. Read at a meeting of the Royal Society, February the 14th, 1747. So there you go. If you didn't know about calendar changes and you came across this document, you'd think that he'd announced Nutation early in 1747 and then wrote it up at the end of 1747. But he didn't. He wrote it up in December 1747, or perhaps a few months before that, and tidied it all up. And then 6 weeks later, he announced it to the world. So there's a question here. What type of person are you sitting out there watching this? Are you a purist? Because if you're a purist, you would have said that Nutation was announced in 1747, because that's when he read it out to the Royal Society. Or are you a pragmatist? Because we would call that 1748. It came after this date. So a purist is going to say, oh, no. He announced it in 1747, all right. But a pragmatist is going to say, no. That'll just confuse people. It's 1748, okay? So let's carry on. Now come to a gentleman by the name of Stephen Rigaud. And this is all part and parcel of chasing up Bradley's date of birth. I want to check all these things before I really am happy. That's the mind of a family historian. Stephen Rigaud was a professor of mathematics at Oxford University, and then latterly the professor of astronomy at Oxford University. And of course, it's Oxford University that Bradley was professor of astronomy at about 60 years earlier. So Rigaud decided to put a package together, which was all of Bradley's works. It's called the Miscellaneous Works of James Bradley. And he wrote a little biography in the front of it, about 30 odd pages, I think. And it comes to about 600 pages. You can pull it down off the web. And he did this in 1832. But what he found was he couldn't find the register for the church at which Bradley was christened, baptized. In fact, 13 years worth were missing, 1690 through to 1703. So he actually couldn't find any evidence of Bradley's birth and baptism. None at all. And it was said that the church that Bradley was baptized at was being refurbished over this period of time. So Rigaud decided that they maybe didn't have a register. That would have been illegal. I would have thought there was a register. But what Rigaud then did was, being a mathematician and all that, he decided to work it out from available evidence. And there were two pieces of available evidence for him. Bradley was admitted as a commoner at Balliol College on the 15th of March, nice interesting date that, 15th of March 1710, which we would now call 1711, in his 18th year of age. That's written into a document that's still at Oxford today. In his 8th, so he was only 17 when he signed in at Oxford. And he died, and this is that 68 that I showed you earlier was the correct answer for the dates I used. But in all the documentation for Bradley, he was 69 at the time of his death. So Rigaud has these two pieces of information, 69 at the time of death, 17 at the time he entered Balliol. And you know what? The only mathematical solution he could get for Bradley's date of birth was that he must have been born between the 16th and the 24th of March, 1692, which we would now call 1693. They're the only dates that fit those two constraints. So Rigaud is the source of Bradley being born in March 1693. He used the new date, what we would think the date is today, not the date that he maybe was born on. And it's only these dates here that count. So Rigaud didn't pick one of those. Rigaud only publishes March 1693. So where these couple of websites got the 3rd and the 23rd from, well, the 3rd couldn't have been right for this. 23rd could be. So I'm now drilling down into this. But being a family historian, I know a thing or two about how you find information out. The sort of information we get today, if you want a passport, for example, and you need a birth certificate, you know where to go to get it. It's at the General Register Office. I'm talking England here, by the way, because that's where Bradley lived and died. What we go to get our information, formal information, is started only in 1837. That's when the government passed a law saying that the government, will handle all births, marriages, and deaths. And thou shalt come and register your birth, marriage, and death with the government when you do it. But if we go back in time, prior to 1837, everything was in the church. Nothing was in the government coffers. And it was baptism, marriage, and burial dates that are with the church. Why? Because the practical decision was made that when two parents brought a baby to the church to be baptized, the minister wouldn't necessarily know what date that baby was born on. He'd have to actually ask the parents. And it was decided, no, they just put down the baptism date, because that's when the minister baptized that child. Marriage is okay, that's the same since 1837 as before, because that's a particular date on which you're married. And again, the church used burial dates because they put the date into the register that they physically put the body into the church graveyard. They didn't know when the person died. And it all started in 1538. That's when the government told churches all over the country, and it's mostly Church of England, by the way, because that was the official church. So even if you belong to a Protestant church of some type, like Methodist or something like that, you would still have to go to the Church of England for your marriage and your baptisms and so on, because that was the official place to go to. And they kept these registers, and they were blank page registers, and the rector just wrote everything into it, or the warden or whoever. But I think they must have had some accidents, because in 1598, which is 60 years later, and I put it in red because it's important, the government passed another law. And this law was that church wardens had to take a physical copy, handwritten copy of the register every month and send it to the bishops. It's an off-site copy. Probably they had the odd fire, flood, ruining some registers. And they thought, oh, we better have an off-site copy. That started in 1598. And these copies were called bishop's transcripts. So anybody doing family history knows this, because they know if you can't find what you want to find, you've got a second shot at it with a bit of luck. And just before I close this off, 1812 was another date in this game when the church said, oh, we don't like blank pages with handwriting on them anymore. And they made pro formas that the churches had to fill in. So this is what I wanted to follow up. So I wrote to Gloucestershire Archives, and I told them who I was and who I was studying, and I was studying this very important person. And so could they help me? Or if not, I'm prepared to come down and go through all your registers, and see if I can find what I want. I didn't tell them that I thought the registers were missing. And very interestingly, I didn't get an email back for about 3 weeks, actually. Usually you get an email back within a day or two, sometimes telling you you'll have to pay money and whatever. They all do it slightly differently. But it was an interesting email, because this email told me that the registers for 1690 through to 1703 were missing. Oh, just winding back to 1837 for a moment. After 1837, the churches were all told to take all of their registers and place them in an archive in each county. So when you go down to England to do this sort of stuff, you go to the actual counties and they've got all the information. I think in Scotland, it's all at the end of Princes Street. So I was sitting there thinking, well, if all the books have to be taken back to the archives, maybe they turned up because they were somewhere and they were rooted out. So I wrote off this, and I got this email back, and no, they're missing, but we've got the bishop's transcripts. Wow. So we've got the Mark II, which clearly Rigaud knew nothing about. And not only that, they found Bradley for me, actually, which is a relief, because it's terribly difficult to find these entries. I'll read this one out. James, the son of William Bradley and Jane, his wife, was baptized October the 3rd, 1692. He was not born in 1693. That date on his monument is absolutely incorrect. He was probably born about mid-September, mid to late September, because that would be the sort of normal time before they came in to get the baptism. So when you go on the web and you type James Bradley, astronomer, and you see all these lists of March 1693, every one of them is wrong. I've only found 2 places on the web where they've got this date. So there were people that must have known how to go about it. So there we go. I've got it summarized here. Gloucestershire Archives confirmed that they were missing, but they had the bishop's transcripts, and we've got the date. So we've now found one date on his monument that is wrong. Absolutely wrong. And to give you some idea of how difficult it is to look through this stuff, there's a bit more of the page. You go cross-eyed. I've actually been through these. These are all the pages you have to look through, scan these pages trying to read this stuff, and it's just good handwriting. Some of them are awful. And I've gone through these things two or three times sometimes before I've found what I want. So it's not an easy job. Now let's have a look at his accession to being Astronomer Royal. Edmund Halley died on the 14th of January, 1741. That's the date that was on the calendar when Edmund Halley died. James Bradley was appointed Astronomer Royal on the 3rd of February, 1741. That's the date that was on the calendar when he was appointed Astronomer Royal. But history records both these events as being 1742, and that's what's on here. So I go back to it. Are you a purist or are you a pragmatist? If you're a purist, you want to see 1741 there. If you're a pragmatist, you're quite happy with 1742. But what really is of interest is 1762, when he died, is only 10 years after they changed the calendar. So they were already rewriting history 10 years in. They were already thinking, well, we'll put the date as it would have been now, rather than the date that it was. So that's the date that we can debate. Do we put 1741 on that monument, or do we put 1742? The other date, his date of death, that's correct. But again, actually, if you went to the registers, you would find he was buried on the 16th of July. You have to know, there's some other documents that show that the death was actually on the 13th. The registers don't tell you. Here's another interesting example. If you did history at school, which I didn't, you may have been told that King Charles I was executed on the 30th of January, 1649. But Parliament's got it recorded as this is the 30th of January, 1648. They can't be wrong, can they? And if you go for some continental text, what about trying the 9th of February, 1649? That's when they think he was beheaded. So there's a bit of a mix-up here. And to avoid confusion, some historians will write down 30th of January, 1648/49. So there's no dubiety here. They're giving you both dates. They're telling you what was on the calendar at the time, and they're telling you what we call it now. And in fact, there are three ways in which you get relayed this information about whether you're looking at a date from back then or whether you're looking at a date from now. And that is both years, like I just showed you, 1648-49. Then there's something called an old style date. And for King Charles' execution, that would have been the 30th of January, 1648. And you write O.S. after it, old style. And then, of course, the opposite is new style. You could write it down this way and put NS after it. So these are the clues that you look for when you go back and you're looking at dates of events back past 1752. Let's have a look at Isaac Newton now. Quite an interesting chap, actually. He was born on the 25th of December, 1642. Oh, incidentally, I did the pilgrimage to his house. It's in Grantham about 5 years ago. It's quite an interesting place to go to. He was born on Christmas Day. Oh, very interesting. I bought this book, the Accession book, there as I came out through the bookshop when I was leaving to go back to the station. So, and what it tells you in this book is that back then, if you were born on Christmas Day, you were thought to be a little bit special. And if you were born on Christmas Day and there was some problem, you were a lot special. You were going to be somebody. Well, as it happens, his dad died 4 months before he was born. He never saw his father. He was brought up by his mother sometimes and sometimes relatives. But I started reading this book on a train going back to London. I was staying with one of my kids at the time. And he was I came to about page 4 and it said he was baptized on the first day of the new year, 1643. Now that's interesting because in one of the bedrooms of Newton's house, it's got a scanned image of the register page for his baptism, and it correctly says the 1st of January, 1642. So I thumbed back through the pages of the book here to see if he was telling me that he was going to be using old style dates or new style dates or whatever. And he doesn't say anything. He just translates them into new style, and you hope he's got it right. But the other interesting thing about Newton is we know he was a special man, you know. On the continent, sorry, that's about the 42 there. They think he was born on the 4th of January, 1643. So had we changed over to the Gregorian calendar in 1582, there would be nothing special about Isaac Newton. So would we know about gravity yet? I don't know. It's a good question. And finally, the painters were in the act as well. This is a painting by William Hogarth in 1755. It's one of a group of 4 called an election entertainment. And what this is, it's set in Oxford just before an election. And these are Whigs. Well, not all these people in this room are Whigs, but the Whigs are throwing a big party because the way to get people to vote back then was to grease their palms with money or give them wine, women, and song. So there's a lot of debauchery going on here. And they're going to hope that all these people will vote Whig when they go to the polling station. And if we look closely here, this is a brick, and this is a chap who's just been clobbered by this brick. And he was the one that was running the show. Because out in the street here, there's a huge rabble making a nuisance of themselves. They're called Tories. And they've just thrown a brick through the window and knocked this bloke out. But the person I want you to draw your attention to is this chap down here. His foot is on something that's a bit of a document. It's got some writing on it, which you can't read there. And I hope you can read it when I bring it up. And I'm going to move, whoops. Let me go back for a second. I'm going to move something here so I can see it. Yeah, it says on here, in case you can't read it, give us our 11 days. So how about that? It rattled round for years. So finally, a little warning, all right? Don't try this at home. You will go bonkers, just like me. But sleep well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Excellent.
Thank you.
Informative, educational, and amusing at the same time.
Good, yeah.
Questions?
Can I, before the questions, can I get back to the people screens? How do I do that? If I type escape, what's going to happen?
You can go to, yeah,
Oh, wait a minute.
you can stop sharing.
Oh, I've got it. No, it's all right. I've got part way in. Let me just pick up Zoom again. I'm there now, I think. I can see people now.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. Okay, do we have any questions for?
We have a number of comments.
Mm-hmm.
John made a comment. John Morrell. Do you want to?
Yeah, I've just lost control of Zoom. How unusual. What did I say? Help.
Yeah.
Oh yes. It's not only the dates of people, of course, you need to be careful with. Historic eclipses and other astronomical events also impacted by such calendar changes. And of course, it's one of the reasons why, as astronomers, we always use Julian dates, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, you've got a 12-hour change as well, which isn't in my question, because obviously Julian date used to change at midday Greenwich Mean Time.
Yeah.
Just to add to the confusion.
Yes.
So,
I'm not
Time
going to
and
get to
dates
that
is-
microscopic level.
time and dates is confusing enough.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing I've just added, which I'll hog the microphone as usual, is of course there wasn't never a year zero.
Yes.
The calendar went from 1 AD to 1 BC to 1 AD.
Yes.
And astronomers bunged the year zero in to get the maths right. So, and of course, year zero wasn't known in the year zero because I think it was only discovered by the sort of end of the Roman period or something. So BC dates get even more confusing. They're always out by a year.
They're one out. That's right. And you've got to actually know that if you're looking at it mathematically, you've got to know that.
Yes. So we'll go back to Julian dates. I can't remember
That's correct. Yeah.
which Julian date I was born on, but that's what we should adopt.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Jim, you had something you were saying? Hello, Jim.
This Jim?
He says, okay, I don't need to speak.
No, no, there was nothing there.
All right.
Any more for any more?
I think Jim was just commenting that he'd been to Woolsthorpe Manor and it was really good. Worth the
Yeah.
visit.
Oh, good. Yeah. It is. It's
I've been
fabulous.
as well. It's really good. Really good.
It's well worth a visit. By the way, when you get picked up by the taxi outside the station, I looked up the buses the night before I went, and it's a nightmare. So I decided to walk out the station and flag down a taxi. And I said, could you take me to Isaac Newton's house? And he said, yeah, do you want to go to Margaret Thatcher's one as well? And I said, no, I'll just go to Isaac Newton, thanks. But he was telling me that the Japanese tourists come by the million, and you have to see these two places, and then they get back on the train and go back to London.
As a former resident of rural Lincolnshire, I know what you mean about the buses.
Yeah. Oh, it's a nightmare. I couldn't work it out, so I just used a taxi.
Sean has a cryptic question.
Oh.
Well, I wouldn't say cryptic. I was just too lazy to type. Once again, thank you very much, Bruce, for a hugely entertaining presentation. I suppose I was just a little curious about on the theme of multiple calendars and astronomical records. Obviously, all of the countries which are predominantly Eastern Orthodox in Christianity still use the Julian calendar for certainly for their religious events. And I was just wondering if that adds an extra complication, whether that's still the case that, you know, given the close link between astronomy and religion in that sense historically, because I know there's issues around how you date events from Chinese calendars and Arabic calendars, but I was just wondering if there's still an issue around the dating of events that have been recorded by people astronomers who were in the Eastern Orthodox countries.
Yes, I'm not an expert on all of it, but I don't know whether you remember, I did a little study on the Venus tablets a few years ago, and I had to actually work out, they worked out their calendar months by the first time they could see the crescent moon. And so it's a bit, iffy. Sometimes it might be one day and then not the next day and that sort of thing. And I had to reconstruct their calendar to actually look at their dates. But I got all the information off the web. The web's amazing. I got all the cuneiforms and everything from the webs that I needed to know. And then I was able to write a software algorithm that could sort the whole thing out, predicting when you would likely see the moon. Now, going back to what John was saying about Julian Day, I have programmed quite a lot of astronomical stuff, and it all depends on something called Julian Day. And it's a set of days that just keep running, basically. And we're at one of them now. It's a big, long number that we're at. Starts at 4000 BC, I think. But you don't necessarily give it a particular date. You know that the algorithm's right for the actual specific day since the year minus 4000 works. It's not 4000, it's a few digits, I've forgotten now. But you have algorithms that can map that back onto calendars. So you'll probably find for some of these other calendars that you're referring to, that those religions have got an algorithm that takes these numbers and puts them into their calendar. So you could actually work out everything. And as I say, most of the algorithms are on the web. If you get stumped by anything, you can just type it in and it comes up.
Fascinating, thanks.
Stuart would like to make a comment on year zero.
Yes, as a student of the life of Jesus, I just wish to point out that the calendar we use, of course, Anno Domini, is the year that Jesus is supposed to be. So this year he's supposed to be 2020 years old. Historians know this, and therefore they attribute the birth year of Jesus to BC 1. There being no possibility of having a year zero put in there. And therefore I urge everyone not to consider there's any error in the dating system. We are just following Jesus' age. That had bearings on the year of the centenary years as well. People often get those wrong. Anyone want to dispute that?
Oh, come on, somebody must.
I think you're fine. No.
No,
No.
we're all convinced.
I rest my case.
Okay, any more questions? I'll bring it done. No, I think we've got, I think, Bruce, you've been pretty comprehensive tonight, as always. Thank you very much.
Systematic.
And we'll look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I've just got a little comment, actually, little interesting comment. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
This is Will. It was a fantastic talk, actually. I never realized how much inaccuracies we could be facing in tracking stuff. But I've just been checking a book here, and it came up with an interesting, it mentioned the 10 days, but it mentioned that December the 10th, the Gregorian calendar is adjusted in France, advances by 10 days. And then on December the 15th in 1582, the Gregorian calendar is adjusted by 10 days. So it seems like different areas in the world adjusted to 10 days on different days of that month. So that even adds more confusion, I would thought.
Absolutely, but that'll be microscopic in that year.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, but you know,
But
so
you could get something wrong, that's for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're looking around in very microscopic ways, there could be little adjustments everywhere. So that's
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic talk, though. Really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
I think John's waving.
Yeah, I was just having a look at Wikipedia, as one does on the other screen, having two screens. Is actually quite an interesting list of the adoption dates of the Gregorian calendar. Apparently, Saudi Arabia didn't adopt it till 2016. Amongst others. And I've got a feeling that Abyssinia or somewhere is still on the Gregorian calendar. Somewhere like that. But they're all over the place. Places like Bulgaria was 1916, the Ottoman Empire in 1917, Russia in 1918. It's quite amazing, really, that, and of course, all those, therefore, events in one country use different dates to those in other countries. So beware what you're looking at.
Well, it just goes to show that when we always suspected, we had no idea of what we were doing when. And
yeah.
Sean seems to be commenting that this is all down to local political reasons. Who could argue?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody. If we're all done, we'll probably see you on Wednesday night.